Welcome and good morning to this press conference of the S&D Group, and it's my pleasure to hand over to our Group President, Iratxe García Perez, and afterwards, of course, to take your questions after her speech. Thank you.
Good morning, buenos días a todos y a todas y gracias por...
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this morning. This week's part session was, of course, initially overshadowed by the decision taken by the President of the European Parliament last week, with which he reintroduced plenary sittings in hybrid format as a result of the COVID situation. And I think that decision accompanies a change in the situation where a large part of Europe is suffering from a new wave. Of course, the situation differs considerably from one member state to another, but it's become very clear that the pandemic is still with us, and all of us have to continue to working to bring it to an end. The only way of doing this will, of course, be to ensure that we can continue to push the vaccination strategy both in and outside the European Union. It's important that we continue to increase vaccination levels in the European population. At the same time, however, we also have to continue to push something which the Socialist Group has been focusing on from the outset, which is that this pandemic will only be over when everybody around the world has equal access to the vaccine. That's to say, the same access as Europeans. This is why it's so important that we have to continue to promote instruments such as COVAX. And we believe the European Union should further step up its efforts when it comes to donating to the COVAX instrument, thereby facilitating access to the vaccine for the citizens of those countries which are deprived of it. As I said, against that backdrop, we're dealing with some very topical issues this week. We'll be negotiating the final agreement reached in the trilogue between the Commission, Parliament and Council on the reform of the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy. This is a major reform, an essential reform. And for our political group, it contains a certain number of essential aspects, such as the rural aspect and the social aspect. We're talking about a reform which affects each and every one of us. Our group wanted an ambitious reform, but there are two extremely important aspects which must be recognized. For the first time, social conditionality has been introduced into the CAP. This is a landmark for us, a historic landmark. And I think it's fair to say that that's been achieved thanks to the hard work of the Socialist and Democrat group. We've also made major progress in terms of environmental policies. In addition to the reform of the CAP, the Commission is also working on updating legislation on the farm-to-fork policy, for example, designed to promote local produce, sustainably produce agricultural produce. And that also dovetails with the biodiversity strategy. So those three common policies, the diversity policy, farm-to-fork plus the CAP, will of course further underline the need for change in the farming and livestock sectors so as to bring us into harmony with the European Union's Sustainable Development Objectives. So I would say the agreement is far from perfect, but it does take us forward in those three areas. We'll be dealing with other important issues during the week. COP26. It seems a long time ago now, doesn't it? But this is actually the first plenary session we've had since the COP in Glasgow. I think we need to recognize that the results aren't as ambitious as we would have liked to have seen, but that there is now clearly an awareness of the danger which comes with rising temperatures. And it does, I think, mark the road forward to ending the use of fossil fuels. 30% of methane gas before 2030, for example, elimination of coal before 2030. Those are two very important objectives. We've also got a debate on the border between Poland and Belarus. A question of fundamental importance, of course. All of us, I think, have been watching this human drama unfolding. There are lots of different dimensions to this drama. There's the geopolitical dimension. How does Europe deal with situations of this type? There is also the question of how we deal with the situations which at the end of the day are human lives, children, women, families, vulnerable people who have been caught on this border, caught in woods. Some of them have been out sleeping out in woods in very low temperatures for many weeks now. And we've all seen in Strasbourg how cold it can get at night. And we shouldn't lose sight of that. I said it during the last part session, I repeat it again. We shouldn't lose our focus. In this situation, clearly only one person is to blame for what's happening on the border. And I'm talking about Lukashenko, the dictator. This is why it's so important for us to step up political pressure, to apply sanctions. Decisions have already been taken, for example, to put pressure on the airlines and transport companies which are contributing to the situation. And the Socialist and Democrat group will support and continue supporting decisions designed to bring an end to this and to prevent the dictator Lukashenko putting pressure on the European Union. At the same time, we can't lose sight of the fact that the European Union is an area based on fundamental rights, and we have to continue to comply with international law. Compliance with the international law means that we have to demand that Poland give access to the border area to international organizations so as to enable them to provide assistance to the families of refugees who are located in the zone. The Polish authorities must also give access to journalists so that they can do their job and to let all of us know what's happening. So if we have to see this from two angles. Obviously, the political issue, relations between the European Union and Belarus. How do we deal with the dictator Lukashenko? But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that what we're talking about here, the people really suffering are people, women, children, families, who spent weeks out in these sub-zero temperatures, and the European Union has a moral obligation to help those people. Thursday is the 25th of November, the International Day Against Gender Violence. And I think you're all aware of just how much we've done. We've been untiring in our group in our efforts to push the Commission to step up the fight against gender violence. In her debate on the State of the Union, the President, Ms. von der Leyen, put forward a proposal which should be completed by the end of the year, outlawing gender violence. We do insist that the Commission be very ambitious. We are waiting for the proposal to be tabled so that we can do our job as lawmakers, which is to move forward with European legislation so as to enable us to turn the page of a terrible situation afflicting women in Europe and elsewhere in the world. It requires a clear commitment on the part of all the institutions, and we will demand that. We will demand that be done as quickly as possible. And I'd like to wind up with my look forward to the week's plenary with the Slovenia debate. After the mission in October organised by the Civil Liberties Committee, we decided the European Parliament must, of course, formalise the conclusions of the work of that mission. and we draw attention to the risk to the rule of law in that country. Institutions in the country are functioning. We can't compare the situation in Slovenia with that of Hungary and Poland. The institutions are still working. But there is no doubt about the fact that the government is constantly trying to reduce the independence of the institutions. So the government has tried to hamper the work of the European Public Prosecutor. And the time has come for them to stop interfering in the work of European agencies, which have been trying to investigate the persecution and the lack of independence for the media. And of course, the events in Ljubljana a few weeks ago as well. So all of that will be covered in the debate in the plenary this week. And following that debate, we will be voting on a resolution on Slovenia in the December part session. Good, I think I've covered the main topics to be dealt with this week. I think the time has now come for questions and answers.
For your questions, I see one in the back. Please indicate your name and media.
This is Francesca De Benedetti covering European politics at the Italian daily newspaper Domani. I have two questions. The first one is...
Can you please wait a second?
Yeah? Okay.
Does it work? It doesn't work?
Yeah, I was saying I work for an Italian newspaper. My name is Francesca De Benedetti, but you can't still hear me?
Please wait. No, but could you let us just wait? Can Iratxe, then you take... Can you say
okay.
something?
Is it fine? Okay. Thank you very much. I have two questions. The first one concerns the issue of global access to vaccines, which you quoted in your speech. I'd like to ask you, what is the S&D position for what concerns the TRIPS waiver? Do you think that at the WTO, the European Commission should clearly stand for the TRIPS waiver, or do you consider donations and COVAX as an option? And the second question concerns my country, Italy. I would like to ask you if you expect the Five-Star Movement to enter the S&D group before the midterm or not. Thank you very much.
Okay, are there further questions? Yes, in the back, please, and then in the front.
Hello, my name is Lawrence Boven. I'm from the Netherlands, from the website Brussels News. I think I missed your vision or your ideas on the European Parliament presidency. I don't know. I think you didn't talk about it, or I missed it. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the situation, because Mr. Weber just told us that he expects S&D to pass the presidency to the EPP. Is this exactly the case, in your opinion? And what are your ideas on the three candidates that they have at the moment?
Yes, thank you. Here.
Hello, my name is Florin Ștefan. I'm with the Romanian National News Agency, Press. I would like to ask you a question about the Romanian political situation. As you well know, the Social Democrats made the deal to form a government with the Romanian Liberals. I would like to ask you your take on this, considering the immense amount of criticism that this parliament has seen between the two sides. You have been caught in the middle in this sometime. And in all this time, were you in contact with the Romanian delegation about these negotiations? Are there any red lines that you advise them against, crossing? Thank you.
Gracias. Y voy a...
Thank you very much, and I will start with that question on the domestic situation in Romania. Of course, we're familiar with the situation. We're aware of negotiations that are taking place involving one of the members of our political family. We have a clear position. We fully respect decisions by national parties when it comes to forming governments. That goes without saying. And what we hope right now is that Romania will be able to give the country the stability it so badly needs. And that is why we very much hope that our social democratic comrades will be able to do their bit in contributing to that stability and also make progress in vaccination rates, which are currently running at such low levels in the country. We're dealing with a pandemic at a time when other countries are progressing. Romania is still languishing at a very low level. And I think that that, to some degree, has something to do with the very low levels of trust or confidence in political structures, and that is why we fully support Romania and hope it makes progress on that front as well as others. Now, there was also another question on vaccinations generally on COVAX. Now, obviously, we champion COVAX. It is absolutely crucial, but it's not the only instrument out there. The Parliament, of course, has already debated the issue of access to vaccinations, and the S&D group was extremely clear in that regard. We want to see the lifting of patents. We want to see intellectual property waivers to grant access to vaccinations for those countries which currently do not enjoy such access. And so we think that we absolutely need to go down that road. But something that we cannot allow ourselves as Europe or as the first world, I mean, whatever you want to call us, we simply cannot countenance a situation in which we have vaccines here or in the US which are reaching their expiry dates, being destroyed, when you have other people who are unable to get vaccinations. I mean, that is the epitome of injustice if we live in a world like that. And I think that should give us pause for thought. We should be pondering the situation. COVAX, of course, is a crucial instrument, and we need to step up our efforts. And certainly, we've got the director of the WHO, which has congratulated countries such as Spain, which is now the world's 5th largest donor of vaccinations to this facility, but is not the only one, of course. And we've got to do what we can to make vaccines available to the entire global population, because it is completely unacceptable, intolerable that we be throwing away vaccinations, throwing away doses when people elsewhere are dying. Now, on the presidency, you didn't hear me say anything because I didn't say anything on that subject. Now, it's true, of course, that we are right now embarking on negotiations, and all of the different groups have laid down their own timeframes. The EPP has its own schedule, and we have our own internal procedures as we see fit, as we think most proper. And I have absolute legitimacy now, following my re-election, to conduct negotiations with the other political groups. And at the present time, the S&D group is starting on those negotiations this very afternoon. President Sassoli will be joining a debate in the political group looking at the various strategies that we should be employing as the midterm looms. The only question really is that nobody wishes to yield. Because, you know, no group is entitled to the presidency of the parliament as such. We don't have to yield the presidency as such, because the presidency doesn't belong to any political party. Rather, it is a decision which is taken by the parliament as a whole. And certainly that is the basis on which we will operate. Now, clearly, of course, we will be demanding political balance. Now, according to the agreement with which we started this parliamentary term, we had balance across the European institutions, that was the way in which we were able to start this parliamentary term. But of course, it will have escaped nobody's attention that the situation has changed over the last 2.5 years. And as things currently stand, the Socialists and Democrats have significant clout and force across Europe in national governments as well as within this parliament. And so we will be working on that basis. I can't tell you here and now anything more specific, but of course we are amenable to negotiations with all of the pro-European political forces, and on that basis we will continue our work in the coming weeks. Because we wish to guarantee political balance and stability across the institutions.
Sobre la cuestión de
On the five-star movement, yes, we are in the same situation as we were on previous occasions. Once there is a formal application, we will of course debate it seriously and ascertain whether the position of the Italian delegation aligns with the position of the rest of the group. But for the time being, we don't have a formal request, so I can't give you any more information right now. As and when we do receive such a request, of course, it will go through the ordinary channels, and then, of course, we will have that debate.
First question here.
My name is Anna Vandensky from Europe Diplomatic. I have a question. Now you said that you criticized Romanians for lack of confidence for vaccination now. And my question to you, what are the words of encouragement you would like to address to people, not only in Romania, but also in France, for example, who are discouraged by the fact that Prime Minister of France yesterday was declared as contracting COVID, in spite of the fact that he's double vaccinated and he had the entire campaign this summer that 2 vaccinations protect. Thank you.
Are there further questions before our President answers? Any further questions in this round? If that's not the case.
Voy a contestar en primer lugar.
Yes, I didn't criticize Romanians. I mean, maybe you misunderstood. I didn't criticize the Romanian people. I just said that vaccination rates are much lower than the European average in Romania, and it may have to do with a lack of confidence in the institutions. And that is why we hope that an incoming Romanian government can re-establish trust or confidence so that vaccination rates rise. That's absolutely crucial if we are to see off this pandemic. Now, I don't want to get embroiled in a debate on the pros and cons of vaccinations here and now, but I do have a clear idea. It's not a personal view as the president of a political group, rather it is something to do with established scientific knowledge, and that is that vaccinations are saving millions of lives right now in Europe as well as across the world. That is a fact. It is true, of course, that vaccinations don't stop you getting COVID, but we just need to look at the statistics, need to look at the hospitalization and death figures for COVID. And you can't compare the data today with the data from a year ago. More than 80% of hospitalizations right now in Europe concern unvaccinated individuals. And if people are vaccinated and still get COVID, then the symptoms are very similar to a common cold or influenza. So quite clearly, the vaccinations are saving lives. And so we've got to simply repeat that message across the European Union, because obviously that is the only way that we are going to achieve the economic recovery that we are all banking on. So let's be clear about the fact that if we are to have an economic recovery, then we need to turn around the public health situation, and to do that, we need to facilitate access to vaccinations, as vaccinations are currently saving millions of lives. So I can't emphasize enough that the situation now is radically different to what it was a year ago. Just look at hospitalization rates.
If there are no more questions, then I would like to thank you all and wish you a good week here in Strasbourg and, of course, online elsewhere. Thank you.